What's going on, everyone? Welcome to show number 214 of the ARC Junkies Podcast. Today, I'm talking with Oliver Adamson, owner of Citizen Build and Long Draw Supply in San Antonio, Texas. Oliver is more than a welder and a fabricator. He's part of his community, and he gives back every chance he gets, whether it's running a fundraiser for a natural disaster or just helping out a neighbor. We'll get right into his backstory right after a quick word from the supporters of the show. Today's episode of the ARC Junkies Podcast is brought to you by Lincoln Electric, the welding experts. Have you seen the new Ranger 330 MPX? It's a welding machine and a generator that's leading the way for the construction and maintenance and service truck industries. The modern design and advanced features allow this machine to streamline welding operations and improve efficiency at the job site. This machine is smaller than previous versions of the Ranger, and it's actually 20% smaller, and it's 25% lighter than other machines in its class, saving you space and weight on your rig. It transports to the field with less bulk and less effort, leaving you more room for tools and other accessories you need on the job site. And it's 60% quieter than other machines in its class to enhance safety and comfort in the workplace. There's plenty of power too, at 330 amps and 28 volts. And it's also capable of running the Magnum Pro 250 LX GT spool gun with direct connect. Check out the 330 MPX today at store.lincolnelectric.com and use ARCJunkies10 to get 10% off this machine or many others. You can also use code word ARCJunkies20 to get 20% off gear and accessories. We're also brought to you by Rockmount Research and Alloys, makers of some of the coolest rods and wires you never knew existed. Rods like the Electric AAA. We've all heard of carbon arc gouging, but what if I told you with Rockmount's Electric AAA, you can do all the arc gouging you needed to without the help of an air compressor. Now you can cut grooves, chase out cracks, gouge, and prep metal with just your welding machine and the Electric AAA. The Electric AAA is a very much improved gouging and cutting electrode designed to provide you with exceptional gouging and cutting capabilities. Electric AAA features low smoke, more arc force, and less fumes than traditional carbon arc gouging. Electric AAA also acts as a contaminant remover and preheater when welding dirty, oily, soaked cast irons. It's ideally used to cut out welds on stainless steel, remove hard-facing material, and make quick cuts when a cutting torch or a plasma unit isn't readily available. You can check out all the Rockmount rods and wires by going to their website, rockmountwelding.com. And don't forget, you can buy Rockmount rods and wires right through MSC Direct and get them shipped right to your door for free. Rockmount rods and wires are designed to weld stronger and last longer. We're also brought to you by ISOTUNES, my favorite piece of PPE. I actually used the Pro 2.0 once again last week. I sat through a 2-hour training session on a plasma software in an active shop. With all the grinding, welding, hammering, and other loud noises, the rep and I were able to carry on a full conversation via telephone thanks to ISOTUNES. The Pro 2.0 model has noise canceling and they double as hearing protection. We were able to communicate effectively for over 2 hours, and the call quality was like having the rep sitting right next to me the entire time. You can get your ISOTUNES today by going to ISOTUNES.com and make sure to use ARCJunkies10 in the discount box at checkout and get $10 off your first purchase. We're also brought to you by Everlast Welders. Everlast has a machine for every budget and skill level, and they're backed by a 5-year warranty. I personally own 3 of their machines myself. I just had a buddy over this weekend to help me on a side job, and I got him set up on my 255 EXT, and he couldn't believe how well it ran. He's always been a little skeptical about buying an Everlast machine because he didn't think it was as good as other machines. After running it for a few hours, he fell in love with it, and now he's planning on getting one himself for his small shop. Everlast has a full line of stick, MIG, and TIG, and multi-process machines right there on their website. Check out their full line of machines today at everlastwelders.com, and don't forget to use code word ARCJunkies in the comment section when you buy any machine that comes with a stock foot pedal and get that free Nova TIG torch and foot pedal upgrade absolutely free. Everlast Welders. Weld mean, weld green. Alright, you know what time it is. Fire your machine, drop your hood, and turn me up 5.
This is Ray Ripple, and you're listening to ARC Junkies Podcast.
You're listening to the ARC Junkies Podcast, helping you make every weld better than your last with each episode. And now your host, Jason Becker.
All right, so joining me today is Oliver, who is a custom metal fabricator out of San Antonio, Texas. Oliver, I heard you on a different podcast, Strangers Worth Meeting, and you've got a pretty interesting story. Tell me a little bit about all the traveling that you've done, because I thought that was, when I heard the episode, I thought that was really cool. I mean, like, you started off here stateside. Well, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, so I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then in middle school kind of wound up in England, and that's because my parents are both British. So my dad was working at a engineering company at the time in Cincinnati, had me and my sister, and 15 years later they decided to move back to the UK. So I ended up going to school out there and going to college out there. As soon as college ended, I ended up in San Antonio, Texas, and then traveled from San Antonio to Austin, California, and then back to San Antonio.
What did your parents come over here initially for? I mean, like, they came over stateside for a reason, right?
Yeah. So my dad got a job at I think it's an engineering company. He works for Rolls-Royce now, doing the airplane engines. Yeah. Okay. He's a really smart dude. So I think it's General Electric. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
I think you're from Ohio, right?
Yeah.
So he got kind of recruited from General Electric from England to come work in Cincinnati.
Okay.
And then, later moved back to the UK to work for Rolls-Royce. I finished up college. It was kind of deciding what I wanted to do with my adult life at that point, whether or not I wanted to stay in the UK or move back stateside. Mm-hmm. And ultimately I was having a rough day at college and I was nearing to the end. I had like 2 weeks left of college, and it was one of those days where I wasn't getting much done. And so I just decided to kind of take the day and apply for a bunch of jobs in Texas specifically, and then ended up getting an internship in San Antonio. And that's kind of what brought me back.
Now, what did you study over there when you were in England? What did you study as a, what were you going to school for?
So I went to school for architecture. Yeah.
And what was your thought process behind that? Is that something that you were interested in, or?
No. So I'd always been interested in building things in architecture, and I don't know what specifically sparked the interest in architecture, but my dad, kind of being an engineer, he was also a really good welder and a really good mechanic kind of on the side. That's what he used to kind of do on his weekends, is kind of build old hot rod cars. I guess you can call them hot rod. They were, he'd basically find these old British, like 1930s, 1940s cars, and they'd be like on some guy's ranch, and they'd have, all the panels were rusted out completely, but you could kind of see somewhat of the formwork. Mm-hmm. So he'd grab like pieces of cardboard and make a jig and form with the English wheel and rebuild all these cars. And I guess it wasn't really hot rod because he would build them to the original state that they would have been in.
Oh, just kind of like factory restore it.
Yeah. So that's what got me interested in welding. And then he actually showed me how to weld in his garage, and that got me interested in welding. I was actually dating a girl, and her dad was an architect, and that I kind of saw some of the stuff that he was working on, and that sparked my interest into architecture to kind of go to school for it. But I always had welding as it was always at the back of my mind, like, I'll do architecture now for a little bit and just kind of see how I feel, and then but I always had welding in kind of my back pocket, but it ended up studying architecture and then doing an internship doing architecture. I was nowhere near as in love with architecture as I was with welding. So that's what brought me back to the welding industry.
Okay. And then how did you end up, like, had you been to San Antonio before you went to England? No. Or how did you land on San Antonio?
I'd never been to San Antonio, but I had a lot of friends. I used to ride BMX, and Austin is kind of the BMX mecca at the time. And I had a lot of friends who would go out there and visit, and they always spoke super highly of Texas. When I was applying for jobs, there was an architecture firm called Lake Flato that, awesome architecture company. And we actually still work with them today. And I ended up getting an internship there, and I looked on the map and I was like, man, San Antonio is super close to Austin. That'd be awesome. And then what ended up happening is I moved to San Antonio and fell in love with San Antonio more than I did with Austin. So, I ended up coming back and starting a life here.
Is San Antonio pretty late? Like I haven't had a chance to travel all over Texas. I mean, I've driven through the entire state. I go to Houston quite a bit, probably 2-3 times a year, but is San Antonio a little bit more laid back compared to Austin?
It is for sure. So square footage wise, it's a lot bigger than Austin. Austin's the capital, but San Antonio is, in some ways, it's like his little sister, little brother. It's way more laid back, way more slow pace, but it's a sprawl city. So it's whereas Austin is a little bit more condensed and busier. But the thing I like about San Antonio is it's got a lot of culture here. And that stuff kind of never dies, it'll always be here, no matter how the city changes. So it's kind of nice to know, but San Antonio is definitely a lot more laid back and a lot more slow pace.
So what was it that prompted, what were you doing, before you started your business?
Oh, so before I started my business, I did that internship at Lake Plato, the architecture company, and that was a year's internship. So after that, I was going to go back to grad school for architecture, but didn't have a dime to my name, so could not afford that. So I ended up getting a job at a welding shop in Austin. It's pretty similar shop to the one I have now. It was custom metal fab, a lot of furniture items. And that's where I really kind of learned how to fabricate. I already had, MIG welding somewhat down and TIG welding somewhat down. The fabrication part, that's where I really started to learn how to fabricate and, cut accurately and blend and then kind of get my welding skills better, just from, working that job. So I was there in Austin for about 3-4 years, ended up moving out to California for a similar gig. And then, I moved back to San Antonio.
What all were you doing out in California?
In California, I worked for a pretty cool contractor. There's a architecture company called Olson Kundig, and this contractor I worked for built a lot of those houses. So I got to work on some really cool projects and in really cool locations. And I started out doing some what they call project engineering, which is basically project management. And I did that, and I couldn't really find my groove with that. I was always kind of drawn back to welding, and just, I definitely have ADD, so I can't sit in front of a computer for, doing desk work for too long. So that was pretty short-lived. I was there for about a year, but then they were nice enough and they kind of transferred me to Southern California, to where I could work kind of like an on-site welder. Cause the contractor would just hire, subs for the welding that they needed, but, they would just need like random stuff around the job site welded. And that was kind of my deal. Mm-hmm. But it was a really cool opportunity. They did a lot of cool projects. There was one project I actually got to do that was in Hawaii. And this is a pretty cool story, because this is where it kind of sparked the idea in my head, like, hey, maybe one day I could own a shop. So they sent me out to Hawaii with that company. They needed a welder to build a couple gates out there. So obviously I wasn't going to turn down a trip to Hawaii. So I ended up going out there for about a month and built a couple gates. And they had basically a carpentry shop, and they had bought like a Miller 210 welder with a little gas setup, and they had a little table that they had made. But anyway, it was pretty much kind of up to my own devices. And so I had to figure out where to get steel on the island. I was on the Big Island, so I had to figure out where to get steel, and then how long it was going to take, and how much I thought it was going to cost a material. So it was really the first time that I took a project from the very, very, very start to the very finish. And then when I did that, I kind of had it in the back of my mind, like, oh man, maybe that would be something that I could do one day, is, you know, not even start a company, but do projects on my own like that. So I came back to California from there, from Hawaii, and had that kind of thought in my head. And, you know, things didn't work out down in California, just because a lot of my friends were back in Texas that I had made, and Texas is a little closer to England. On the flight, I guess it's like 2 hours less, which is a little nicer. So I couldn't really find my groove in California. So I ended up moving back to Texas, and that's when I started Citizen Build.
That seems like a pretty decent spot. So like right when you came back, I mean, like what was your thought process on how to, you know, just start a building or start a company from nothing?
So when I moved back, that I wasn't even, I actually kind of started Citizen Build on accident. I was basically buying about 3 months of time before a job that I wanted to do would start. So I wanted to work for this company in Austin, and ended up needing to buy some time. So I was staying on friends' floors in San Antonio, and you know, I was 29 at the time, didn't have much income at all. And I had a friend who I met when I worked at my internship in Lake Flato, and he wanted these super cool kind of horizontally pivoted screen doors for his pool house built. And he also wanted a bunch of furniture built. And he was like, man, it probably will take about 3 months to build all this, and you can use my garage to work out of. So, you know, I was like, okay. So I thought back to that time in Hawaii, and I was like, okay, well, first I'll bid out the job and see how much, you know, my costs are, and then see how much I want to make on top of that, to keep me going for 3 months, and then just shoot in the price. So I did that, and he agreed to the price and started work with a couple hand tools. So I had to go out and buy a welder, and I bought one of those Miller suitcase welders. I also had a stick welder that I was using, and I worked on his pool house for about 3 months. And you know, I started an Instagram account and started posting videos and pictures of this pool house I was building out. At the end of the job, he needed a railing done. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do that. And then it got down to the wire, and I was supposed to leave the next day to start this job. And at the time I felt really bad, because it was, you know, a day later, and I was supposed to be at work. And I was kind of sat on the edge of the pool, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to continue doing this, I'm going to, you know, jump in the pool. But if I'm going to leave for this job, I'm going to go and pack my bags right now. And then ended up just diving headfirst into that pool. And since then I finished that pool house up, and then, you know, posted pictures to Instagram of everything. And the ball just kept rolling and rolling and rolling. And then, you know, here we are 5 years later. But yeah, it happened really very naturally, and nothing was ever like forced. You know, it was always kind of me just thinking, okay, well, I mean, at that time I didn't have a dog, I didn't have a family, you know, it was just me, and kind of just ended up getting more and more projects every time. And it was basically through Instagram growth.
So was that like Instagram was kind of like your method of marketing? You use that to get other jobs and kind of push the work that you were currently doing?
That's initially, and I think for the first like 6 months, that's initially how it was going. Cause I guess basically Instagram has somewhat kind of took the place of websites, because it's so accessible for people.
Oh, definitely. And then it's free. There's no hosting services. Like you just build an account and, you know, spread the good word about what you're doing.
exactly. And that's all I was doing. And initially when I was doing that, I was just posting stuff because I thought it was cool that what we were doing. I wasn't posting it, in the hopes that this thing would start, because in my head, at the time, I thought I was going to start this other job and do that. But then because of Instagram, people were seeing that work, and kind of word got around San Antonio. San Antonio is a large city, but a small community, and word got out. And I would say that's Instagram growth was initially how I got more and more work, but as it evolved, it was more word of mouth.
So it's really cool how, like, especially with Instagram, I know Facebook's like a different, it's a different type of social media, but like Instagram has been like, it's made, accessibility to people and their products and the type of work that they're doing so much more accessible to people. And it seems like, it sounds like you've kind of built your business off of, pushing everything that you do through Instagram.
Yeah. That's basically the main marketing tool for me.
Yeah, because you got like a portfolio right there. People can come check out your work and see reviews, or comments on the different types of projects you were doing.
Mm-hmm. And I use it a lot when I'm with potential clients. As like a website, I'll pull out my phone and just scroll through the Instagram and say, look, hey, here's some railings that we've done that are stainless steel that is kind of similar to what you're talking about. And right then and then they can be like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm picturing, So it's a really good tool. Like you said, it's free. There's no ads, it's nice to have the website. I do have the website, and it's nice to have that, because that allows people to go to a place that has just photos of finished products. Mm-hmm. Whereas Instagram is more like, for me, I kind of post like day to day.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing about like linking your Instagram to your website is people can, they get a general idea what you're doing on the website, but then they click on the Instagram icon and like you can upload stuff instantaneously. You don't have to like go back into the back door through the website and, set up a new page or a new area to like post additional photos. You just link right to your Instagram account, and that you can, people can see your stuff by the hour, by the minute. If you're doing live videos or stories, they can kind of catch up and see a lot faster, using Instagram as that tool.
Yeah, no, it's awesome for that. And, but yeah, now I would say it's more word of mouth, but even then we kind of stick to the same contractors we've been working with for the past 4 or 5 years. We have such a good working relationship with a lot of these contractors that, they use us as their main steel guy, and they're kind of our top clients, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then we also have, and they kind of serve like all the large jobs that we do, 3 to 6 month long projects. And then I kind of pepper in all these small projects in between. And those ones are very much like word of mouth, or even, on Instagram. I've even got work just through like direct messages, Yeah. So Instagram has definitely helped.
Now, do you find like having a background or a degree in architecture has actually helped your business as a welder? Because you can kind of understand the design process and how things go together and how it's going to look initially. Yeah,
I feel like that right there is that I can kind of visualize a lot of the time, where having studied architecture and then been around a lot of architects, I kind of somewhat have a knowledge of, okay, this is what they're going to look for. Because the stuff we do is basically residential custom fab. So, a lot of fireplaces, gates, windows, doors, staircases, that kind of stuff. And there was one time we were working with this architect, and we were doing these 2 barn door sliders. They were bifolding, so like an accordion style door, and they kind of met right in the middle. And I noticed right in the center of this opening was a grout line with the tile. And I saw that, and I was like, man, those architects, they're going to be bummed out if the center of our doors don't line up with that grout line. And so I made sure that was my center point. I kind of ignored true center.
True dimensions.
Yes. And I made sure that was our center point. And the first thing, I was there when the architect saw them for the first time. And the first thing she did was look at the grout line. And she looked at me and she was like, lines up with the grout line, huh? And I was like, yep. I knew you were thinking that. Yeah. So I feel like it does. I do have a little bit of a knowledge of what they're going to be thinking. And it's the same with fireplaces with all the seams, just making sure seams are correct. And, you know, sometimes houses are not true and plumb, especially in San Antonio, where we're working on like my house, for instance. It's built in the 1920s, and I'm actually looking at a door jamb that I did a couple weeks ago, and over 12 feet tall ceilings, it's 2 inches out of plumb.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So sometimes we work with a lot of that because the soil's so loose in San Antonio that houses kind of shrink and pretty much have to have your foundation done every 20 years. So a lot of times we're working with like out of plumb and out of level houses, especially on the old houses, not so much on the new construction, but so we kind of have to sometimes disregard what is true plumb and either make up the difference or match to the house, or even keep it plumb but kind of make a tapered joint that matches the contour of the house. Or there's a lot of little tricks that we have to do to kind of match that, but yeah, a lot of the architects are wanting seams aligned and all that stuff, so it's helpful to know that for sure.
And it's hard to do that, like as a fabricator, is like not build something plumb or square or level, and it like racks my brain because I did a lot of work for like theme parks, and so they've got like a lot of theming stuff going on. So a lot of times like it's intentionally not straight, or you know, things aren't uniform or spaced out correctly, and it like you got to kind of put yourself in a different mentality or different mode to do that type of work, because you can't keep reaching for the square and the level and the measuring tape. Sometimes what looks good is, you know, that's what it needs to be. It just has to look good aesthetically. And, you know, like you're saying, you know, I've built, you know, 2 houses and stuff that weren't in, you know, they're not plumb. And then you kind of have to build gates to kind of match the contour of the house. That way, when you're standing back and you're like, if your gates and stuff are perfectly plumb and level and square, you look back and somebody's going to tell you that's not square, that's not level, because they're looking at the house, which, you know, they're anticipating that being right.
They've got that backdrop.
Yeah. So you got to build it to kind of match that scene.
Yeah. And it's usually, you know, on these vent hoods, it happens a lot where the steel panel will basically wrap a vent hood in steel plate. And a lot of the times the walls are, you know, crooked. But what we usually do is we'll set up a laser line that's, you know, plumb and level laser line. And then we'll measure off of that laser line to everything, and we'll taper out the plate to match the contour. So everything else past that is plumb and level, but your eye never reads that out of plumbness of the house because you've matched the contour of the side of the wall, you know, because some of these houses, if you build everything plumb to the wall, you'd have big old gaps to
fill in,
to deal with. But but yeah, knowing all that stuff that architects are looking for definitely has like an upper hand, making sure that they're going to be happy at the end of the project.
Yeah, that's what, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is making the customer happy, or the client happy, or the contractor happy.
Exactly, because that's what gets you repeat work, is as long as they're happy, and you know, you're gonna get called back. Having that knowledge is pretty key to knowing exactly what they're looking for, because they might not say it sometimes, or they might not think to say, oh, I want it like this, because you know how it is. There's always those pieces of information that don't get talked about because they're so minuscule that you know that they'll know, like the grout line, you know, it might not get talked about because it big picture stuff, you know, they're not going to talk about grout lines, but you know that they're going to want that, you know.
What's some of the, like the challenges you faced as a new business owner, setting things up, trying to get your name out there, trying to get work, like you're new in town, you're just getting set up. Like, what are some of the challenges that you faced kind of going through that?
Honestly, I mean, when I started the business, it was, like I was saying, it was very kind of organic and kind of happened super naturally. So at the start, I didn't have a family to support. It was just me. So my means and overhead were so low that I don't think I was very fortunate enough that I was never chasing work. It was basically project after project. There was no projects that now I'll have multiple projects at once, but back then for the first year, it was doing a project and that would end. Then I'd have a couple weeks off and then another project would start. I definitely remember times where a month would go by and I didn't have anything and I was getting a little bit worried. But like I said, my shop rent was like $400 at the time. My money could stretch a lot further. And then when I started getting more and more projects, it just kind of snowballed, and that money I just used to invest back into the company. Bought a new tool for, I think I remember hearing a podcast that you did before where y'all were talking about how every job that you got back in the very beginning, you'd buy a new tool for that job. You're like, okay, well, this job, I need a portaband. So I'm going to plug that into the budget and buy myself a portaband. And now I have a portaband, that's kind of been the way I've ran the business since day one is if I get a project and I don't have a tool, I kind of buy that tool for that project. And then the larger stuff, kind of set some money aside each month for something that I want to get.
Yeah. You just kind of bid the cost of the tool right into the budget, but now you've got that tool for the next job that you need.
Exactly.
And that was kind of like, what I did for the first year when I started off my small businesses. I was just having a small business to support my tool addiction.
Yeah. Now that was kind of how it happened for me. It was just very, I had it very easy. It was a very easy process compared to a lot of stories I've heard. I mean, there's definitely been times with the business where there's a high and there's a low, and then 1 week you're doing really good, and then 1 week everything's super slow and no money's coming in, but toward the first year was a very steep curve upwards with not many dips. But then after like year 2 and 3, that's when I started getting the dips and then the highs and then the dips. But the first year was great. The first year really set the business up, kind of built the foundation for it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of upfront work, and then you can kind of, once you start picking up, it's like I've said before, you start building a monster, then you got to feed a monster. But it's right. In the beginning, that's the hardest part, with anything, nothing ever starts off easy. You start pushing and working, and then, things just start to fall in place. And then the next thing you're just like, damn, now I got to start hiring more people because the amount of work that we're getting in, or I need more tools, or I need a bigger shop, or, anything like that. I mean, but you've got to, and you can't plan for that growth because you don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. You could be one day away from landing like a major contract or developing a relationship with a contractor that's going to keep, using you time after time. And they could have, work, 6 months, for the next 6 months already booked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's just I say that the first year was easy, but it was easy in the sense that work kept coming to me, but it was not easy. I mean, it's hard work. It's a lot of 80-hour weeks, a lot of South Texas heat. But as far as workload, that has always been a constant, which I'm very fortunate for. And now that I have a family and, a kid, the pressure's on, right? It's when those slow periods happen, you get all worried. But then, like you said, in a couple of weeks, you could be a day away from landing a big contract, and then the page turns and you're going from being slow 1 week to now you're just pulling like a 80-hour week and you're blowing and going,
Right. Now, do you have a lot of employees working for you?
So I have one, I technically have 2 employees. I have one guy who helps me out on a day-to-day basis. And then my wife does all the books, so she's technically an employee too. And then I also have about 2-3 guys that I pull in as kind of contractors, kind of whenever I need them. They have like day-to-day jobs, and they, if I have more work than I can handle for me and the other guy, I'll bring in a couple contractor kind of 1099 guys that will help me out to kind of push things forward a little bit more. But I've always kind of kept the business small, and that's how I've always wanted to be, is a small kind of almost mom and pop kind of shop. But yeah, but yeah, my wife does all the books, and she's a really, really good help to the business, because I don't have to be in the office, and I'm not the best at, organization as far as
paperwork
office
and all
stuff,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. She always jokes around, and she's like, man, if your organizational skills were as good as they are in the shop as at the house or at the office, then
Be in trouble.
Because all my tools are in their place, and the shop is always nice and clean, and the saw's always dusted off, and I do a big shop clean every Friday and make sure everything is super, super clean. I have those strong hand tables with all the jig tables, and once every month I go through those and I polish them all up. And when it comes to computer work, all my files are everywhere, and all my receipts are in the drawer, not organized. So she helps an insane amount with that stuff, and that having her has definitely stabilized everything for sure.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break. This segment of the Arc Junkies podcast is brought to you by Strong Hand Tools, makers of heavy-duty fabrication tables, toggle clamps, and a plethora of other fabrication items to make your life as a welder and fabricator that much easier. And if you're a student and you want to get a free gift pack for your school, head on over to stronghandtools.com/ArcJunkies and register today. Now let's get back into the show. Now, I want to go back to, as you were talking about, like the different fabrication tables, and those are such a freaking godsend. Just having something to be able to like fit all your parts in place, lock everything down. Like when I was doing theme parks, we used something called an acorn table. And so they've got like 2x2 squares in them, but like all the tooling is like this old steel, like heavy duty shit. Like like these pins that we would, lock things in place with, they're like 15, 20 pounds, and you got to beat on them with like an 8-pound sledgehammer. But once you dog it down, it's not going anywhere. And like we were doing some intricate stainless steel, like polished stainless steel stuff. But yeah, having a fabrication table is so freaking awesome versus, you got like an old 1/2-inch sheet of metal and you kind of put legs on it and that's the new table. And, now you don't have anywhere to clamp in the center, and, things just, parts are still moving. And then you take the whole table and you weld little pieces of angle iron everywhere to make a jig or a fixture. And it's just a pain in the ass. And then you get done, you got to knock them all off, grind them all out. But fixturing tables, they save so much time and so much effort, with regardless of what you're building. I freaking love mine. Yeah,
they really do. I started out also on basically a piece of steel.
That's where everybody starts out, like 1/2-inch or 5/8.
Yeah. Yeah, just a piece of steel plate and grab some tubing and tack it to the table and then beat it off when you're done. My dad, he was working in the garage, and he always told me from a young age, he was always, buying Snap-on tools, and he was always like, always buy the best you can afford, because it'll pay for itself a million times over. And I always had that kind of thought in my head. So I've always bought the tools that I can afford, that to the best of my affordability. And those strong hand tables are awesome. And they, like you said, you can put a jig anywhere on the table. And for the longest time, I was just using the clamps. And only up to about 2 years ago, I started getting into all their fixtures and getting all the pipe clamps and getting all the stops. So you can lay out a stop pattern and then square everything up. Because a lot of the stuff we do at the shop has got to be square. Like we don't do any like auto body stuff, like roll cages up in the air. It's always flat on the table. So a lot of the stuff we do, we need like stops and those stops just to get a square edge saves so much time and effort. Like you said, it's just pop it in and then you butt it up to your stops and you know that that's a perfect 90-degree angle.
And then once you clamp everything down, you can start building all your pieces out and then, take everything back off. And then, now you've got a fixture and you can line everything back up the next time, clamp it, tack it all up, pop that one off, and you can keep going. And then once you're done, you just, pull all the pins out of the table, lay everything back up there and do it like an entire weld out on it.
Yeah, they're really awesome tables. And what we use them for also is, so I have 3 tables, and a lot of the times when we do these big gates, we need to span from one table to the other because some of these gates are like 16 feet long and they have those adjustable feet on them. And also the table is dialed in, I can't even remember what, I think it's like 1/1000th of an inch. They're so flat that you can level them out with a laser across, 16 feet of space. So now you've got 2 tables that are in the same plane. They're both level. So now you can build a big railing package on it as one piece and then screw it in when you're in the field, So
do you guys do I'm assuming you guys do all the fabrication at the shop. Do you also do most of your installs or all of your installs together, or you just build the parts there at the shop and then somebody picks it up and they do the install?
So we do everything from, either architecture drawings, engineering drawings, or sometimes we get, napkin sketch. So we take it from that point and we do shop drawings. So my architecture background,
paying off again.
That's paying off because I learned how to use AutoCAD. So I model. So before a project even starts, before we even get material in the shop, I do a 3D model. And in that 3D model, I'll model literally everything, all the nuts on all the bolts, how the bolts go together. And that way there's no surprises in the field. So I start there and then we do all the fabrication in the shop. And I try and fabricate as much as we can in the shop, and basically bring a parts kit out to the job site and minimize our time out in the field. Because a lot of the times these jobs that we're doing are 3 hours west of San Antonio and the nearest Home Depot is 2 hours away. So if we forget a tool or forget some bolts that we needed, we're kind of dead in the water. So before we even go out, there has to be basically a fabrication piece, like a parts kit, and then also a tool list. Because some of these, we've done a lot of jobs in West Texas and Big Bend, and there isn't a Home Depot for about 300 miles. I usually do like an Excel sheet of all the tools we're going to need, every single wrench, every single, and I'll even think about okay, well, if this happens, we're going to need a grinder with a cutoff wheel to make sure we can cut that out if something happens.
Yeah, there's common problems you run into when you've been doing stuff for so long.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that stuff. We better bring the porta bank because just in case we need to recut that piece of steel, because who knows what might happen.
I've done that many nights, planning for the next day, because when I did stuff with the ironworkers, it was every day, especially out at the theme parks, every day was something different. So if I knew what was going on the next day, or we were gearing up to do a project, I'd do the same thing, man. I'd be at home making mental and physical notes. Okay, I need to bring this, material, shims, scrap material, this type of tools, these type of bits, because you don't want to forget anything. And you brought the drill, but you forgot to bring the drill bits. Well, now we're screwed. Or you bring the drill bits, you don't, the drill's back on the charger at the shop. So I'd make a list out, and I'd get to work the next morning and start, going through the list, loading everything up, putting it all in buckets and throwing it all in the work truck. Because like you're saying, sometimes you get out there to a job, trying to get to a store is a couple hours away. So now you got to multiply that by 2, because, if it takes you an hour to get there, it's going to take you an hour to get back. Now you've lost 2 hours of production. And, a lot of times that's the one thing you need to get done to finish up the job. and now you're 2 hours behind because you got to go get a one bolt, that's an hour away.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I do the same thing. I like set out like a list of every single nut and bolt that I'll
build stuff mentally. I'll do like a mental build, before I even walk out of the shop and start cutting things. So like if I place an order for material, I'm already starting to mentally build whatever it is I'm working on. And a lot of times I can foresee problems that I'm going to run into, or, if I'm going to go do an install, just kind of like mentally go through, what does that whole install process look like? Oh shit. Here's something I need to make sure I throw on the truck or throw in the bucket or have on me, because, this is something that I didn't think about till, you're going to go actually do the install.
I always do a thought process in my head where I'll think to myself, okay, what's the worst that could happen on this install? And, I'll say to myself, okay, well, we're doing a railing package and we're going to screw into the floor. The worst things that could happen are we screw into that guy's nice hardwood flooring and we split it. So let me make sure we bring enough pre-drills. And then maybe we're going to have to pull some heads out, and we use a lot of those black oxide screws, and they're kind of somewhat one and done, because once you torque on them, kind of rips the black oxide off a little bit on the head. So if you don't get it in one shot, you kind of have to take that one out and put a fresh one in. So it's like, okay, make sure you got like an extra bag of screws, So I always think about what's the worst thing that can happen. There's times where you just, forget.
I mean, there's times this shit's going to happen, but then for the next job that you get on, like, hey, remember that remember last time we did something like this and we forgot this part or didn't plan this part out, and then now So I mean, like, some of the best lessons are the ones that you have to just kind of work through and figure a way out of it. Yeah,
and I'm really big on fire safety too, because a lot of the times we're working on these houses that these clients are spending a lot of money on, and we're doing hot work with like open cavities and insulation everywhere. So I have a policy where we don't do any MIG or stick welding inside. If it's inside, it's TIG. Where there's no wind, it's more controlled. And we always have a fire extinguisher on hand, and we have an electrical fire extinguisher, and we also have a water fire extinguisher. And then we don't leave the job site for 45 minutes after any hot work. So we'll plan for that. We'll be like, okay, we're gonna quit grinding that out or welding that out, and then we'll clean up and pack out, and then by that time you're
pretty much done leave. At that point.
But I used to, in California, I was working with a guy. We were cutting all this rebar on the side of a hill, and he was using one of those big concrete saws, and he was grinding, and the sparks were just flying into this bush, and he caused like a little bush fire. And ever since I saw that, I was like, man, it's so scary.
I did that at my house. I was building like this little step bench for a guy that does, he's like a personal trainer and needed like an adjustable step bench built. So I was like, oh yeah, I can knock that out. And I didn't want to do all the grinding inside my garage. So I wheeled everything out to the driveway, and I had everything set up on my table, and I was using a 36 grit sanding disc. And I really wasn't going hard on this stuff. I was just like cleaning up edges and kind of shaping the corner on some tread plate. And then I just started, caught the smell of burning wood, and I was like, oh, neighbors must be firing up for a barbecue or something. Because, I mean, it's pretty common in my area. Like every weekend, somebody's got a fire going for something. And I kept smelling it, and I was like, man, that's weird. It's like I can smell it. The wind's blowing the opposite direction, so it's got to be pretty close. And I turn around, and my mulch bed's on fire, and I'm like, oh, shit. So I had to run over, grab the garden hose, and put it out. And I was like, man, I didn't even think that, something like that would happen, like, right there. So, I mean, just, like, planning ahead, and, then, so now on, anytime I go out there to start doing any work, I'll take the garden hose out, and I just spray the mulch bed before I even get started, because you get, like, a little rogue spark going, and I'm down here in Florida. It gets dry certain months out of the year, and, it's working at, welding in a tinderbox.
We do that same thing. Sometimes we'll be welding railings over a deck that goes over a lot of, trees and stuff like that. And we'll water down right below us. And then we'll start, especially if we're stick welding, because that stick splatter is something else. But especially when you have your hood down and you start smelling it and you're still like halfway in a weld and you're like, you kind of smell something going on, but maybe it's my shirt. When you lift your hood up and you're on fire.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So thankfully, never had a shop fire, but I did work at a shop that had a shop fire. And how it happened was they had a what's called a downdraft table. And I guess that thing has like a big old filter inside and you have to clean that filter out. And, I was young at the time. I didn't know this kind of stuff, but, we're at that shop, we were just doing steel work. So grinding a lot of steel on that table. And then he had an aluminum job coming. And then we started grinding on this downdraft table and no one cleared out the filter before. And I guess when you mix steel and aluminum dust and put a spark to it,
you make something called thermate. It's like a cousin of thermite. It's and then you can't put it out with a regular fire extinguisher. You got to use like a special chemical fire extinguisher for metals, for like exotic alloys.
I can't remember how they put it out. This was like 10 years ago. I think because it was inside the filter was inside the downdraft table, I think they suffocated it, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah, you got to be careful mixing aluminum oxide and steel oxide.
Yeah. I always stay away from the aluminum jobs for that reason. We've done a couple aluminum jobs, but a lot of the times I'll kind of shy away from them just because of that reason. Because I don't want to clean out the shop and then do the work and then have to clean it out again. And then it's like the CNC plasma table that we have.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it can cut aluminum, and I'll get a lot of guys and they're like, hey, can you cut like this aluminum part I need for my truck? And it's like a 4 inch by 4 inch square or something. And for me to do that, I have to empty out the entire water table and clean out all the steel and then cut the small part and then put it all back. And I'm like, man, it can cut aluminum, but the amount of work I have to do to clean out that table to just cut that one part.
If you do aluminum on a plasma cutter, you only need to drop the water level just below the material. So maybe drop it 2 to 3 inches. And then we'll put like fume extractors on it. And it's because like a lot of times, like the water table is so close to the material that as it's basically touching the material. And then when you pierce and make a cut and it goes through the aluminum and everything, you're putting air inside of, that water table. But then you're also, as you cut aluminum with plasma, it creates hydrogen. So now you've got air and hydrogen coming in there, and that bubble will kind of rest. It'll make like a little pocket somewhere between the water and the actual part. And then once the torch gets over there and cuts through that, now you've got a nice little bubble of hydrogen. And yeah, I've seen pictures of it just blowing tables apart and stuff. So if you just drop the water level to where you can't build up a hydrogen pocket or of gas in between the water and the plate, you'll be fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I used to drain my table completely, and then I started doing a lot more research on it. And you just gotta make sure that and we'll put like a fan up there too, just to kind of blow in between the grates to where it's nothing's collecting in that area.
That's very good knowledge to know.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I seen you started a long draw supply plasma cutting company. So what led you kind of into that?
So long draw supply started when I bought the CNC plasma cutter. I basically bought that CNC plasma cutter because we do a lot of planters and a lot of fire pits and a lot of the vent hood wraps and fireplace wraps, and cutting all that stuff with a circular saw with that Milwaukee. We got that Milwaukee large circular saw. The blades dull out super easy, and it's just a lot of effort. And after about 20 of those jobs, I was like, man, I'm gonna save up for one of those. So I ended up buying one. It's the ArcLight Dynamics table with a hypertherm torch. Actually they're a really good table because their customer service is bar none. It's they'll remote log into your computer and control your table from your computer and show you, why you're getting this error. So they're super helpful. But anyway, we bought that, and for the first year, it pretty much just sat for Citizen Build, and we just cut parts that we needed. A lot of little brackets for custom door hardware. And then, I started getting a lot of people asking me for parts to be cut for their project. And it was awesome because it was a lot of other fabricators. And usually you don't get to work with those people, because you're both fabricators, you're doing the same thing, but now you get to work with them because they need the parts cut. So it was pretty awesome getting to work with other fabricators, but that sparked an idea in my head of maybe we should start a separate company that's just CNC plasma cutting and kind of just market that. And in the past 6 months, we've had it for a year, and in the past 6 months, it's grown a lot to where Citizen Build and Long Draw Supply are pretty much 50-50 as far as workload.
And then you're overseeing both companies, back and forth, labor wise.
Yeah. So my wife co-owns Long Draw Supply. So again, she does all the bookkeeping and she does a lot of the invoicing and stuff like that. It's like a little ATM, I just load a plate on there and I get the file all organized and collaborated. And if everything's good and my tips are nice and clean, and it's pretty much just plug and play. So I can hit that and then kind of man it either by ear or just kind of looking at it a couple times and checking the cuts. And then I can be over in the fab area, building, some brackets or something. So it's a really good tool to have, not only for Citizen Build, but for Long Draw Supply. But we in the past 6 months, it's really kicked up, and we got a lot of really cool, contracts going with some cool clients. Nice. So it's been a blessing for sure.
Yeah. Plasma table. They save you so much time. So now any brackets you got to build for stair railings or anything like that, you can just walk over there and knock it out, little base plates for everything. There's a lot of times where, I just need a base plate. And I'm like, oh, let's just cut it on the plasma table. Or there's a lot of times where I'm like, oh, we need this flat bar cut with this kind of hole layout. But let's just cut it on the plasma cutter. On the plasma. Yeah. And when I got that thing, I kind of kicked myself in the foot because not kick myself in the foot, but I put out, told all I have a lot of friends who ride motorcycles and build choppers and whatnot. And I was like, any motorcycle stuff is free. so I got a lot of guys being like, hey, can you cut this thing up for me? And I'm like, sure. But I always keep that stuff separate so that it's, more for the love and there's no money involved, And that's, I met up with a company that they do, they get a CNC plasma cutter, but it also has the scribing head on there. So they'll do stair railings and stuff like that. So they'll actually just grab an 1/8 inch sheet of metal and then throw it up on the plasma cutter. And then they can import the prints or, directly to their plasma cutter. So they'll take the PDF of the prints or whatever file it's located in. They'll draft it right into their CNC plasma cutter and put a scribing head on there. And then it'll go through and do all the engraving. And now you have a perfect template. So you throw that right up on the fab table and you just start slapping everything into place.
Yeah, no, they also sell for the ArcLight one, they sell that scribing tool that you can attach to the head, and I think they call it an engraver. And then they also have a pipe notcher, so you can set up pipe and notch around, kind of cope around pipe. But yeah, no, that plasma cutter, and that's where my architecture background really plays a key in, is because it starts out, as out as CAD, and then you throw it into the computer and get your G code. So knowing the CAD prior to having the table was was huge.
Which CAD software you predominantly use?
I use Rhino.
Okay, I haven't tried that one yet.
It's called Rhino. It's basically AutoCAD, but it has a 3D
component
option.
Okay.
Yeah, so Rhino is really good for what we do because a lot of the parts are kind of larger. It's not so good for very small, intricate stuff, but for like large, like gates and staircases and stuff like that, it's perfect because you can 3D model to a 32nd degree accuracy.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So with Citizen Build, before like a large project like a gate or a staircase or a door, I'll 3D model literally everything, and then that way we don't have any surprises.
Yeah, and then you can kind of foresee a lot of problems and stuff as you're drawing it out. You'd be like, oh, this part's not going to fit here, or this is going to be in the way.
There's been a lot of times where I've been in the CAD program in 3D with gates especially, and being like, oh, that roller can't go there. That's going to hit right there. Or, that lock can't go there because when we open it, it's going to hit. And that's actually what it's really good for is on door frames is I'll draw that thing out in 3D and I'll play around with where my hinge point is. Mm-hmm. And I'll rotate the door on the center of the hinge so I can see if it's going to hit the jamb when it opens out or not.
Okay.
So we can make our tolerances a little tighter. We can go to like an 1/8 inch and it not grab that door and have our hinge point a little set more back, because sometimes they want their hinges more set towards the interior, but that affects the swing. And so it's really good for that. It's a lifesaver.
Is it a pretty simple software to learn how to use? It's pretty like user intuitive.
To do the basics, it is to do the basics, but when you get into 3D modeling, that's where it does become a little tricky. But I mean, tricky in the sense that it's just experience. Yeah. I mean, it's just sitting on there, figuring out what the commands are and just getting your muscle memory to remember. But it's not. I wouldn't say it's hard to pick up. It's definitely harder than like SketchUp. SketchUp is more if you just want to pick up a 3D modeling software, then SketchUp is perfect because it's very easy to use, very user friendly. But Rhino just has so many commands that can be a little overwhelming at first.
Yeah, I learned on AutoCAD from Autodesk. Uh-huh. And I was able to get a free student version because like at the time I was going to school, and like it's the only software that I really like to use because I still remember like all the different little hotkeys and all that stuff to be able to draw stuff out. So like learning
that's the same as
learning like a whole new software. It's like, damn it. Like, but some of the stuff that they're coming out with nowadays is like free or, very simple to use. There's a lot of YouTube tutorials and stuff on how to use this stuff. It doesn't, it's not such a powerful tool that it takes a whole lot of space up on your computer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you know how to use AutoCAD, you'll transition to Rhino pretty easily. But yeah, there's a lot of new stuff coming out and I'm always like, oh man, maybe I should try that. But then I feel like I'm getting old in the sense that it'll take me forever to pick up something new.
So how, like with your CNC plasma business, are you running that through Instagram too and like drumming up work that way? Or has some of the contractors, now that you have that capability in your shop, you got some of the same contractors like giving you different, in new work?
No, that one is very much word of mouth. The Instagram account for that doesn't have anywhere near as much traffic as Citizen Build ever did. I've almost contemplated just deleting it because I don't get any work from it's more of just a place just to showcase it, just to show people, hey, we're cutting stuff out. If you ever
use it as like a working portfolio.
Yeah. And I really like to do a lot of stuff for the community here in San Antonio. So I love doing projects for just like little signs for different businesses or coffee shops, or, if a friend needs something cut, sure, let's just cut it out, But really there's been no marketing tool for long draw supply. It's just word of mouth.
Okay.
I got in with one contractor in the commercial world, and from there, he's obviously knows other people and they need other stuff cut. And I feel like I kind of got into that little niche and cut everything the way they wanted it. I mean, the nice thing about the CNC plasma cutting that I really like is it's like math. It's either right or wrong. Mm-hmm. It's either you cut this part correctly or you cut it a 1/4 inch too large. Like it's either yes or no. Whereas the custom fab stuff, sometimes it can be a matter of opinion, right? Like if you're building something in the shop that you don't think warrants an RFI from the architect because it's so small, and then you go out there and install, and then they ask about that one thing that you didn't ask. There's a lot of variables that can happen with citizen build, whereas with long draw supply, it's like, yes, it's like math. It's like yes or no. It's either cut right or cut wrong. And I like both worlds, but it's nice to switch it up sometimes and just be like, here's your part. It's, 5 3/8 by
it's
this
exactly
part,
what you asked for.
Yeah, exactly. So that's helped. It's just the same as citizen build, like just always doing work to the best I can do it and the most accurate we can do it and on time. I like to keep that as a kind of motto too, it's just always, if we say we're going to be done by this point, we're going to be done. Or if something's going to be cut by, a lot of these commercial contractors are working on deadlines, so if they want someone who's reliable, basically, who can cut their parts exactly how they want them. And if I say it's going to be done on Friday, it's going to be done on Friday. And if I just keep up the word of mouth just flows. But Instagram hasn't really kicked off for long draw supply like it did with citizen build.
So do you do like stuff for the general public as well with long draw supply?
For the general public, sometimes a lot of the times people want like their numbers for their address cut out, and I like to do that stuff too. But a lot of times it's for businesses that have just opened up. I mean, San Antonio is growing so fast that a lot of, those new restaurants and new coffee shops popping up all the time. And it's really cool to do signs for them with their logo. Mm-hmm. I mean, even up in Dallas, we're doing a sign, a door with their logo for a tattoo shop up there called Salvation Tattoo that just opened up. Their logo is super cool. So it's really nice to be in that world, and then also, cut jig parts out, which is more like bread and butter, but it's nice to do the creative stuff on the plasma table too. It's really fun too, because having a kid and being so close to home and being in the shop all the time with long draw supply is super nice too, just to be 5 minutes down the road and be able to come home for lunch and not be on a job site 5 days a week.
Yeah. As I know, Sam Hackman just did that. He got himself a little place just down the road. He takes like a little pocket bike to and from work just because he's so close. He just like buzzes on down and then he'll buzz right back.
Yeah. Sometimes I walk my dog to work, and it's very nice to be super close, especially with the kid, because I can come home for lunch and see him. And then I'm not so worried about being home late, before his bedtime to catch him. But no, long draw supply is really good for the community. We do a lot of t-shirts for Citizen Build that are fundraiser shirts for the community in San Antonio. So we like to do those too. We have one coming out for our 5-year anniversary, but I don't know who we're going to do the fundraiser with this time. There's been a lot going on with COVID, and with we had a freeze in Texas. It was pretty bad.
I remember that last year.
Yeah, we did a fundraiser for the freeze. We did these big T-shirts that said "Weld for Texas," and they were all the money went to a company called Meals on Wheels that gave out free meals to, you know, people who needed it during their freeze, because a lot of all the grocery stores were down because the supply trucks couldn't get in, and, you know, all the power was out at the grocery stores and a lot of food went bad. And so we like to do a lot of stuff like that too. And that's really where the name Citizen Build kind of came from, is kind of being like a community, being kind of engraved in that.
Just being kind of tight knit with the community and everything.
Yeah, basically being kind of tight knit with the community and helping them out wherever we can. Whether it be a t-shirt fundraiser that goes to a fundraiser, or just cutting out like the neighbors, you know, cutting out the neighbor's door sign because the mailman sometimes doesn't deliver mail to her house because he can't see the sign, or he gets it wrong or something, you know, kind of keeping us more of like a mom and pop shop, but we also do large projects.
Okay.
And that's why I kind of keep it small, keep it under 5 employees. Like I said before, I also have ADD. So for me, more than 5 employees,
too much to keep track of.
Yeah, I couldn't keep track of all that. That's too many projects at once.
Yeah.
So we usually have about 2 or 3 going at once. Usually one large project at once, and then kind of pepper in all those small ones here and there, kind of keep the cash flow going pretty quick. But that's a good kind of stable rate that I like to run everything at.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, man, you build a monster, you got to feed a monster. So if you can kind of keep it contained and, you know, pick up the amount of work you want to keep you busy, keep, you know, you and your family taken care of, your other employees taken care of. I mean, that's a good way to do it. That's the problem, is everybody, you know, they fire up a business, and the next thing you know, man, they just want more and more and more. And it's like, you know, you keep putting more into it, and now, you know, you don't own the business owns you, because now you've got all these different customers and clients. You know, you're kind of at their mercy, their budget, their schedule, and, you know, you don't have any time for you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Someone actually told me that about 3 years ago. They were like, do you want to run the business, or do you want the business to run you? And that really hit home for me. And obviously you want to run the business. So.
Yeah, but it's awfully tempting to pick up, you know, a couple more clients here and there, and the amount of work that, you know, oh man, with these next couple of jobs, I can expand the shop and, you know, get more tables and tools and people in here.
It's very tempting. Yeah. I talked to a lot of, you know, other trades on the job sites. And one time I talked to an electrician, and he was an older guy, and he was like, man, there was a point in my business where I had 5 fleet trucks, I had 50 employees, and now he's just a one-man show with a helper. And he was like, man, at this point, I'm way more happier. He was making more money than he did with 5 fleet trucks. Yep. And, you know, you got more money coming in, you got more overhead going out, and more headaches.
That's my buddy down the road, man. Like the guy that showed me how to do gates and handrails and all that stuff. I mean, he was at a point where, you know, he had 5 to 6 employees, couple of work trucks, you know, and I mean, he was just slammed with work. And then he's like, yeah, this is too much, and dialed everything back. He's one guy, one helper, you know, same situation, back down to 1 work truck that he uses for work and personal, but, you know, mostly for work. And, he's always just been happier with, you know, 1 person in the shop, just, you know, 1 helper. Yeah. He trains them, helps them out, you know, and it works great for him. And he makes just as much money with 1 person helping him out as he did with 5 people. Cause like you said, now you're not keeping track of 4 or 5 different payrolls. You know, you're not having to worry about benefits and workers' comp and people not, you know, showing up to work and, you know, all that, you know, picking up more work and extra work to keep everybody busy. You just keep enough to keep the lights on and, you know, put a little bit of extra money in your pocket, you know, here and there. And I mean, that's really all you need. Keep it small, keep it simple, you know, run the business on your own terms. Like you run that business, don't let that business run you.
Exactly. Yeah. Your happiness is definitely worth more than any large project could give you. But yeah. I've always lived by that motto too, is just taking a break every Christmas and New Year and just taking a step back and thinking what you want out of the next year, you know. But I also don't try and plan too far ahead. So I only usually have like a 1 year, 1 year plan.
1 year goal.
Yeah. 1 year goal, kind of keep the pressure down.
It's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Run it on your own terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll always be there, but it's just, how much do you want to grow, or how much do you just want to stay at this point that you've been at for the past year? But yeah, I think that's a good way to roll with it.
Yeah. Well, before we get out of here, why don't you go ahead and plug your various social medias and your website, tell people how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah. So you can either get a hold of us by our Instagram, which is at citizen_build, or for CNC plasma cutting, long draw supply. And the websites are in the bios, or they're citizenbuildtx.com or longdrawsupplytx.com.
Nice. Well, Oliver, I appreciate you coming out, taking the time to chat with us and stuff.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to be on the show. So thank you.
Yeah, man. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.